Okay, so now here we have the, I believe it's the Battle of the Trident. It's Robert Baratheon, who is the king who at the beginning of Game of Thrones, and he's fighting Prince Rhaegar Targaryen.
This is one of the key scenes in A Song of Ice and Fire that occurs, before the books open. But it sets the stage and everything that follows. Let's see, this is Justin Sweet, right? The painting?
Yes.
Yes, Justin. Incredible artist, Justin Sweet. He's done some magnificent work for us.
So, quick and short video for today because we gotta talk about that colossal screw-up that was the release of the Feast for Crows Illustrated Edition. It came out within the last 48 hours, and my god, did they mess this up. But before we get into that, as always, leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. You know the drill. Let's just get into it. And, it's been 20 years since the fourth book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series came out, A Feast for Crows, and I hate saying that because the time has flown. And of course, because it's the anniversary of it, the 20th year, they gotta release the illustrated version of this one too, like they did with the others, to milk this as much as they can, and while they still can. And normally, you'd hire some really good artists to come in and draw up some of the standout moments in the books, and so far, the only real issue people have had with the previous versions was the lack of consistency between them, as you can see here from several reviews on Amazon. But somehow they managed to mess up what was easy money for them. Not only is the art in this book even more inconsistent with previous versions, the artist they hired to do this is being accused of using AI, with how bad some of these pictures are. Now, before we continue, I'd like to think that most of the people who watch this are intelligent enough to understand why I can't say definitively that this is AI because it hasn't been confirmed, and I'm not trying to open myself up to certain issues if you catch my meaning, so we're going to use words like allegedly and in my opinion for this video. That being said, in my opinion, this looks like some AI dog shit. Oh my god, what the hell happened? We gotta break down some of these pictures because, believe it or not, the worst of these illustrations isn't that the person might have allegedly used AI, keyword allegedly, might have. I don't know if he did, it's not confirmed, alleged, yada yada yada, but the worst of it is that somehow the people in charge of this whole operation chose the one guy in the world who draws fantasy stuff that just happens not to be a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, or knows how to use Google to look up Ice and Fire characters that he's covering and drawing up. For example, this is Jaime and Cersei, I assume, at Tywin's funeral. You remember Tywin's funeral, where he had hair and a crown while being covered in the Targaryen colors of dark red and black? And oh look, there's Jaime, not in his Kingsguard armor, with shoulder-length hair and no beard. I think the most concerning thing here is that Cersei's arm is dislocated, and her necklace has fused onto her chest because, why the fuck not? And look, I'm not saying you need to be a fan of the series to draw some banger art, but it would help to have some knowledge of the characters' descriptions or even have read the chapter you're covering to, bring everything together. This looks like generic blonde man and blonde woman with dislocated arm watching a warrior king take a nap on a stone bed. Again, you don't have to be a fan of the series to cover this work, but maybe have some knowledge of how to use Google? A simple search could have given you dozens of articles, pictures, and Reddit posts about what the situation should possibly look like? Maybe? No? Okay. Well, before I move on to the next thing, I want to highlight one artist every time who, in my opinion, did these scenes better. And for Tywin's funeral, I want to shout out Sam Hogg, who had the best one with a fairly accurate and, might I say, perfect rendition of what it should have looked like. I absolutely love the detail on the catafalque. Jaime is in his Kingsguard attire, short hair and beard, and he's actually standing Vigil alone, like in the chapter itself. Very cool. Also, before we move on, remember the color blue on Cersei's dress? It'll be important in a minute. Next up, we have Lady Stoneheart. Now, I'm not a big fan of her eyes glowing like she's one of the zombies from Call of Duty, but it's fine. What I can't abide by is the fact that she has Robb's crown, or I'm assuming it's Robb's. And you remember that crown, right? How notoriously gold and fancy it was, or, as any fan should know, it wasn't. And in fact, as someone who has been in this fandom for over a decade, I can safely say that Robb's crown is the only royal headpiece that the fandom goes crazy over in terms of detail. George went out of his way to make sure that in Clash of Kings, you knew that not only was this not the typical gold and silver fancy one that other kings had, but it was a whole conversation on why it was bronze and iron with swords and runes on it. Now, the funny thing about this is that yesterday, when the idea of these might being AI came up, someone on Twitter thought of the same thing I did and compared it to the one picture I also had in mind, and that is the Lady Stoneheart drawing by Zippo514 on DeviantArt. And I think that's the reason this person I immediately thought of the same drawing. It's because Zippo's Lady Stoneheart is, to me, the gold standard of what the character should look like. This is absolutely perfect drawing of her. I love it. They got everything down. They got the crown, the skin tone, the vengeful look in her eye. Honestly, Zippo has other Ice and Fire drawings that are so good. I don't know why they didn't just throw money at this person to just do the whole book. Now, remember when I said to keep the color blue in mind? Well, remember in the books when that's all that Margaery and Tommen wore during their wedding? Or should I say, generic teenage girl and young boy sitting together wore in a church? Again, I've been part of this fandom for over 10 years, and I've seen hundreds of pieces of artwork, and the one thing that has remained consistent across all Ice and Fire art is the love and, frankly, need to put banners and house sigils on everything, even random objects. But here you have, I'm assuming, Margaery and Tommen not wearing their house colors and no banners anywhere in sight, or even their house sigils on any of their clothing. Random symbols are all over the place on their clothing, but nothing resembling their house for some reason. Infamous A Song of Ice and Fire artist Urtach Altanos on Twitter pretty much broke down this picture in specific on why he thinks this is mostly AI. I'll leave a link in the description below to his account so you can check that out because he's been a professional artist for years, and I'd rather take his word on this over anybody else's, especially when it comes to A Song of Ice and Fire art, which he has been involved in for a very long time. Now, I couldn't find a Margaery or Tommen wedding art, so I'll show you some of my favorites of the characters by themselves. This one of Margaery from Bella Bergolts is awesome. I absolutely love this one. And this one here of Tommen with his cats by Joshua Cairos is also pretty great. And remember what I said earlier about the sigils always popping up somewhere in the picture? Check out Tommen's headboard. Now, before we wrap this up, I did want to run by a couple of these to prove the point further that the guy they hired probably just didn't really give a damn. Here's generic fantasy action man with giant axe, also known in some circles as Ario Hota. Do we have any fans of Victorian Greyjoy in the audience? Well, this is him in his infamous two-sword style, instead of the axe and shield he's supposed to have, and honestly, I'm surprised they even got the color of his cloak correctly, but somehow failed to make the ends of it look like a kraken's arm reaching down to his boots. Okay, but if you're a fan of the Blackfish, then this is possibly one of the best renditions of him I've seen in a very long time. The guy made him look very badass, and even gave him the Tully sigil on his armor, so there you go. It would have been better if all of the Tully colors were here somewhere, but as we all know, this guy's favorite color is blue, so have more blue, I guess. And guys, look, I don't think George was given any of this to look over before it was released because he would have called out all of the errors and downright sloppy art here. There was clearly a lack of quality control from the people in charge, and it shows. Not only is this disrespectful to the fans, but also to George himself, who's in an active lawsuit along with other writers against OpenAI over this stuff. And funny enough, George actually does comment on art all the time and even has some of his favorites too. The clip in the beginning of the video is proof of that. He was such a fan of the Robert Rhaegar fight that he knew the artist by name immediately. I have no doubt that George was not consulted with this, and it's just a downright fuck up for everybody involved. Again, I don't know if AI was used or not. It's not officially confirmed, but in my opinion, it looks like it might have been used. And that's a shame, especially when you consider there are hundreds of artists in the fandom they could have hired to have done this. There are artists out there who would have done it for free, because who wouldn't want their names on the same book as George R.R. Martin himself? I can't stress enough how bad this is, and I'm curious to see how it gets handled going forward. And of course, we will be covering this and more on the podcast because there is more to talk about. Believe it or not, someone on Reddit tried to use some AI bullshit to piece together the Asha fragment, and we're going to call that person out specifically. Can't wait for that one personally. But as always, let me know what you guys think. Be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It helps out immensely, and consider checking out and supporting us over on YouTube memberships or on Patreon. It's only $1 a month. Links below in the description. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.